In the marble halls of Baldoria Palace, where portraits of kings and queens have watched over centuries of secrets, one woman discovers that the crown she thought she knew hides a darkness that could destroy not just her marriage, but an entire kingdom. When Queen Isabella finds a hidden letter in her late mother-in-law's chambers, she uncovers a web of lies that reaches from the palace kitchens to the highest chambers of power. As dawn breaks over the kingdom of Valdoria, 3 generations of royal women must face a truth that will either unite them in strength or tear apart everything they fought to protect. The question isn't whether the monarchy will survive, it's whether the people they've become in service to the crown are worth saving at all. Queen Isabella Montclair had always believed that morning light held promises of truth, but as she stood in the east wing of Valdoria Palace at dawn, the golden rays streaming through ancient windows seemed to mock her faith. The letter in her trembling hands bore the royal seal of her late mother-in-law, Queen Evangeline, and the words written in elegant script would change everything she thought she knew about her family, her marriage, and her role as queen. The discovery had been accidental. While overseeing the final preparations for the memorial wing dedicated to Queen Evangeline, Isabella had noticed a loose stone in the fireplace mantel. Behind it lay a wooden box containing dozens of letters, photographs, and documents that painted a picture of the royal family, far different from the pristine image presented to the world. King Alexander, her husband of 15 years, was still asleep in their chambers, unaware that his wife had spent the entire night reading through evidence of financial corruption, political manipulation, and personal betrayals that stretched back decades. The most damning document was a contract bearing his signature from just 2 years ago, an agreement that would grant unprecedented mining rights to foreign corporations in exchange for campaign contributions to political allies, all hidden from Parliament and the people. Isabella's hand shook as she reread the contract. Alexander had always presented himself as a champion of environmental protection and national sovereignty. She remembered the speeches he'd given about protecting Valdoria's natural resources for future generations, the passionate way he'd spoken about their duty to the land and the people. Had it all been performance? The sound of footsteps in the corridor made her quickly gather the documents. Her daughter, Princess Catherine, appeared in the doorway, still in her evening gown from the charity gala that had ended just hours ago. At 23, Catherine possessed the kind of natural grace and intelligence that had made her beloved by the public. But Isabella could see the exhaustion and something else, worry, in her daughter's eyes. "Mother, you're up early," Catherine said, stepping into the room. "I saw the light under the door. Are you well?" Isabella studied her daughter's face, searching for any sign that Catherine might already know about her father's secrets. The princess had been increasingly involved in environmental causes, often speaking publicly about sustainable development and corporate responsibility. How would she react to learning that her own father had been working against everything she stood for? "Catherine, sit down. We need to talk about something very important," Isabella said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. As Catherine settled into the velvet chair across from her mother, Isabella made a decision that would set in motion events none of them could control. She handed her daughter the contract with Alexander's signature. Catherine read in silence, her face growing pale as she processed the implications. When she finally looked up, tears glistened in her eyes, but there was something else there too, a steel determination that reminded Isabella of her own mother, the late Queen Mother Victoria, who had ruled with quiet strength through 2 wars and countless political crises. "How long have you known?" Catherine asked quietly. "I found this an hour ago." "There are more documents, Catherine. Much more. Your father isn't the man we thought he was." Catherine stood and walked to the window, looking out over the palace gardens where morning mist still clung to the rose bushes. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that seemed too heavy for someone so young. "I've suspected something wasn't right. The new policies, the sudden changes in environmental legislation that he claimed were necessary compromises. I thought I was being paranoid." She turned back to her mother. "What are we going to do?" Isabella joined her daughter at the window. In the distance, she could see the staff beginning their daily routines. Gardeners tending to the grounds, security personnel changing shifts. All of them trusted the royal family to lead with integrity and honor. The weight of that trust felt crushing now. "I don't know yet." But we can't pretend we don't know. The question is whether we confront your father privately or whether this needs to become public knowledge." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, and Isabella could almost see her daughter's mind working through the complexities of their situation. Finally, Catherine spoke with a conviction that surprised them both. B. There's someone else who needs to know about this before we decide anything. Someone who might have answers we need. Isabella raised an eyebrow. Who? Lady Margaret Sterling, father's former chief of staff. She resigned suddenly 6 months ago, remember? She said she wanted to spend more time with her family, but I never believed that. She loved her work too much to leave voluntarily. Isabella remembered Lady Margaret well. A sharp, principled woman in her 50s who had served the royal family for over 2 decades. Her departure had been abrupt and poorly explained, leaving many palace staff confused and concerned. You think she knows about this? Isabella asked, gesturing to the documents. I think she might know more than we do, and if we're going to expose this, we need to understand the full scope of what's been happening. We need allies who understand the system from the inside. As the morning light grew stronger, mother and daughter began planning their next moves with the careful precision of military strategists. They would need to be cautious. Alexander had allies throughout the government and media who would protect him at any cost. But they also had advantages. Isabella's spotless reputation and extensive charitable network, Catherine's popularity with younger citizens, and most importantly, the moral authority that came from doing what was right regardless of personal cost. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Isabella quickly gathered the documents as their personal assistant, James, entered with morning tea. Your Majesty, Your Highness, the King is asking for you both. He's in his study and says it's urgent.
Isabella and Catherine exchanged glances.
The timing seemed too coincidental to be mere chance. Did he say what it was about? Isabella asked. No, Your Majesty. But he seemed concerned about something. As they made their way through the palace corridors toward Alexander's study, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that their discovery of the documents might not have been as secret as they'd hoped. Palace walls had ears, and Alexander had survived in politics for decades by staying one step ahead of potential threats. When they entered the study, Alexander was standing behind his desk, fully dressed despite the early hour. His usually perfectly groomed appearance showed signs of stress. His hair slightly mussed, his tie askew, but it was his eyes that caught Isabella's attention. They held the same calculating look she'd seen during his most difficult political negotiations. Isabella, Catherine, thank you for coming so quickly. Alexander's voice was controlled, but Isabella could detect the underlying tension. I've just received some disturbing information from security. It seems someone has been accessing areas of the palace that should have been sealed after my mother's memorial preparations were completed. Isabella felt her heart racing, but forced her expression to remain neutral. Beside her, Catherine stood perfectly still, giving nothing away. That's concerning, Isabella said carefully. Do they know who it was? Alexander's gaze moved between his wife and daughter, studying their faces with the practiced eye of a politician, accustomed to reading people. He stated, by safety observation of the southeast. There was something in his tone that hadn't been there before. Suspicion. They're still investigating. But I wanted to speak with you both because I know you've been deeply involved in the Memorial Wing project. I thought perhaps you might have noticed something unusual. Anyone who didn't belong, anything out of place. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken accusations and hidden knowledge. Isabella realized that this conversation would determine not just what happened to the documents she'd found, but the future of their family and their kingdom. Catherine stepped forward slightly, and when she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had made a difficult but necessary decision. Puerto Rico. Father, there is something we need to discuss, but I think we should do it privately, as a family. Perhaps we could ask James to ensure we're not disturbed. Alexander's expression didn't change, but Isabella saw his hands tighten slightly on the edge of his desk. After a moment, he nodded to James, who quietly left the room, closing the door behind him. As the sound of James's footsteps faded down the corridor, the 3 members of Valdoria's royal family faced each other across the study, each knowing that whatever happened next would change their lives forever. Alexander was the first to break the silence. What exactly do you think we need to discuss? Isabella reached into her coat, and withdrew the contract with his signature. She placed it on his desk without a word. Alexander looked down at the document, and for just a moment, his careful political mask slipped, revealing something Isabella had never seen in her husband's face before: fear. The silence in King Alexander's study stretched for what felt like hours, though the antique clock on the mantel showed that only 30 seconds had passed since Isabella placed the damning contract on his desk. Alexander stared down at his own signature, his face cycling through emotions like a man watching his life flash before his eyes: surprise, calculation, fear, and finally resignation. When he looked up, the king Isabella had married 15 years ago was gone, replaced by a stranger whose smile held no warmth. "You went through my mother's private papers." His voice was soft, almost conversational, but Isabella could hear the danger beneath it. "I found a loose stone in the fireplace mantel while preparing the memorial wing. The documents were hidden behind it," Isabella replied, matching his calm tone while her heart hammered against her ribs. Alexander moved around his desk with the predatory grace of a man accustomed to controlling rooms full of people. "To read personal family correspondence without consulting me first?" Catherine stepped forward, positioning herself slightly between her parents. "Father, the issue isn't how we found these documents. The issue is what they contain." Alexander's laugh held no humor. "Ah, my idealistic daughter. Always so concerned with right and wrong, never considering the complexities of actual leadership." He picked up the contract, examining it as if seeing it for the first time. "Do you have any idea what this kingdom faced 2 years ago? The economic crisis that threatened to destroy everything our family has built over centuries?" Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't the reaction of a man caught in wrongdoing. This was the calculated response of someone who had prepared for this moment. "I know you presented a completely different picture to Parliament and the people," Isabella said. "You told them the crisis was being handled through proper diplomatic and economic channels. Because sometimes, my dear wife, the truth is too complicated for public consumption." Alexander moved to the window, looking out over the capital city of Valdoria in the distance. "That contract saved our economy. Those mining rights provided the foreign investment we needed to stabilize our currency and prevent mass unemployment." Catherine's voice shook with barely controlled anger. "By selling our environmental protections to the highest bidder. Those mines are destroying watersheds that have been protected for generations. The communities living downstream are already reporting health problems." Alexander turned back to face them, and Isabella was struck by how different he looked in the morning light. The charming, principled man she thought she knew seemed like a costume he had finally decided to remove. "Casualties of leadership, Catherine. Every decision has costs. The difference between children and rulers is that rulers understand sometimes you must sacrifice the few to save the many." "And what about the other documents?" Isabella's voice was steady, but she could feel rage building in her chest. "Payments to media outlets to suppress environmental reporting? The bribes to parliamentary members to ensure votes on resource legislation? Were those also necessary sacrifices?" Alexander's facade cracked for just a moment, revealing something uglier beneath.
You read everything.
But enough. Isabella pulled out her phone, showing him a photo she had taken of another document, including the correspondence with Crown Prince Victor of Moldavia discussing arms sales to regions under international sanctions. "That's not economic policy, Alexander. That's criminal conspiracy." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Alexander's political mask slipped completely, revealing a cold calculation that made Isabella's blood run cold. "You stupid woman. Do you have any idea what you've stumbled into? What you've put at risk?" Catherine moved closer to her mother, and Isabella was grateful for her daughter's presence. The man standing before them wasn't someone she recognized anymore. "I've put corruption and criminality at risk," Isabella said. "But I've put lies and betrayal at risk. That's exactly what I intended." Alexander laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. "You've put your lives at risk, both of you." The threat hung in the air between them, and Isabella felt something shift inside her chest. Person, not fear. She had moved beyond fear into something colder and more dangerous. Determination. "Are you threatening us, Alexander?" Before he could respond, There was a sharp knock at the study door. Alexander's expression shifted instantly back to his public face, the transformation so complete it was like watching an actor step into character. "Come in, T." James entered, his usual composure slightly ruffled. "Your Majesty, I apologize for the interruption, but Lady Margaret Sterling is here. She says it's urgent, and she needs to speak with the Queen immediately." Isabella felt Catherine tense beside her, and she knew her daughter was thinking the same thing. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Alexander's carefully controlled expression flickered for just a moment. "Lady Margaret?
I wasn't aware she had an appointment."
"She doesn't, Your Majesty. But she insisted it was a matter of national importance." Alexander's voice was sharp. Isabella made a decision that would change everything. "Send her in, James." "Isabella, this is a private family discussion." "No, Alexander. This stopped being private the moment you decided to sell our country's resources and principles to foreign interests." Isabella stood straighter, and for the first time in years she felt like a queen rather than just a wife. "James, please escort Lady Margaret to us." As James left to retrieve Lady Margaret, Alexander's composure finally cracked completely. "You have no idea what you're doing. You're going to destroy everything." "We're going to save it," Catherine said quietly. "From you." When Lady Margaret Sterling entered the study moments later, Isabella was struck by how much the woman had changed in the 6 months since her resignation. Always impeccably dressed and composed, Lady Margaret now looked worn, as if she had been carrying a terrible weight. But her eyes were clear and determined. "Your Majesties, Your Highness," she said, inclining her head slightly. Then, looking directly at Isabella, she added, "I believe you may have found some documents that raise questions about recent palace activities. Margaret, it's good to see you. I hope you're well.
Oh.
Perhaps we could schedule a proper meeting. With respect, Your Majesty, I'm not here to see you." Lady Margaret's voice was firm but respectful. "I'm here because I've been monitoring certain communications, and I believe the Queen and Princess may be in danger." Isabella felt Catherine's hand find hers, squeezing tightly. "What kind of danger?" Isabella asked. Yongafa. Lady Margaret glanced at Alexander, whose face had gone pale, before responding. "The documents you found are only a small part of a much larger operation. The people involved have significant resources and no qualms about eliminating threats to their interests." "Margaret, you're making serious accusations." "I'm stating facts." Lady Margaret's tone was ice cold. "I resigned because I discovered that members of this administration were planning to silence anyone who might threaten their operations. But that included potential threats from within the royal family itself."
Isabella felt the ground shifting beneath her feet.
"You're saying Alexander was planning to—" "I'm saying that certain individuals with access to significant resources were making contingency plans in case family members discovered information that could compromise their activities." Lady Margaret looked directly at Alexander. "The passage of Buckingham Palace to protect their interests were Father May-keeping. His royal protocol was barely a whisper to protect their interests of an entire world of protocol. Adi himself. Is this true?" Alexander's face cycled through several emotions before settling on something that looked almost like relief. "You want the truth?" "The truth is that naive idealism is a luxury this kingdom can't afford. The truth is that sometimes protecting what matters requires getting your hands dirty. And sometimes," a new voice said from the doorway, "it requires cleaning them." Everyone turned to see a tall, elegant woman in her 70s entering the study. Isabella's breath caught in her throat as she recognized Queen Mother Victoria, Alexander's mother-in-law, who was supposed to be traveling in Switzerland for her health. "Grandmother," Catherine exclaimed, rushing to embrace the older woman. Queen Mother Victoria hugged Catherine tightly, but her eyes remained fixed on Alexander with an expression Isabella had never seen before. Pure, cold disappointment. "Alexander," she said quietly, "I had hoped I was wrong about you." Alexander's composure crumbled completely. "Victoria, you don't understand the pressures." "I understand perfectly." Queen Mother Victoria's voice carried the authority of someone who had ruled during wartime and economic crisis. "I understand that you've sold our country's integrity for personal gain. I understand that you've betrayed your oath, your family, and your people." She moved to Isabella's side, placing a protective hand on her daughter-in-law's shoulder. "What I don't understand is how you thought you could hide it from me forever." The study fell silent as the implications of Queen Mother Victoria's words sank in. The place she had known. She had been watching. And now she was here to end it. Alexander's political instincts made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Mother Victoria, surely we could discuss this as a family." "We are discussing it as a family," Queen Mother Victoria said firmly. "There is why I'm giving you one chance to do the right thing voluntarily before I make the choice for you." The morning sun was now fully streaming through the study windows, casting long shadows across the room. Isabella realized that the dawn she had greeted with such hope had indeed brought truth, just not the kind she had expected. As she looked around the room at the faces of the people she thought she knew, Isabella understood that this was only the beginning. The documents hidden behind the loose stone had opened a door that could never be closed again, and whatever lay beyond it would test everything she believed about family, duty, and the price of doing what was right. The queen she had been when she woke up that morning was gone forever. The woman who would emerge from this moment would have to be stronger, smarter, and more ruthless than she had ever imagined possible. Because the alternative was letting corruption and betrayal win, and Isabella Montclair would burn the kingdom down before she let that happen. Her presence in the study shifted the entire dynamic of the confrontation. At 73, she carried herself with the regal bearing of someone who had weathered political storms that would have destroyed lesser rulers. Her silver hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, and her steel-gray eyes missed nothing as she assessed the situation before her. "Sit down, all of you," she commanded with quiet authority. "We have much to discuss and very little time to do it." Isabella found herself obeying automatically, as did Catherine. Even Lady Margaret, who had served the royal family for decades, took a seat without question. Political folly remained standing, his politician's instincts warring with years of ingrained respect for his wife's grandmother. Queen Mother Victoria opened an elegant briefcase that Isabella hadn't noticed her carrying and removed a thick manila folder. "Alexander," I said, "sit down." The king sat. "Good." Queen Mother Victoria placed the folder on the desk between them. "Now before we proceed, I want everyone to understand the gravity of our situation. The documents Isabella discovered are real, but they represent only a fraction of a conspiracy that threatens not just our family but the stability of our entire region. Revealing photographs, financial records, and official documents bearing seals from multiple governments. For the past 18 months, I've been conducting my own investigation into certain irregularities I noticed in governmental decisions and royal finances." Isabella leaned forward, studying the papers. "You've been spying on us? I've been protecting us." Queen Mother Victoria's voice was firm but not unkind. "When someone has been on the throne for as long as I was, you develop certain instincts about when things aren't quite right." Alexander's face had gone ashen. "What exactly do you think you've discovered?" Queen Mother Victoria fixed him with a look that could have frozen flame. "I've discovered that my grandson-in-law has been systematically selling state secrets, natural resources, and military intelligence to a consortium of foreign investors led by Crown Prince Victor of Moldavia and Chinese industrialist Chen Wei-ming. Please tell me this isn't true." Alexander's silence was answer enough. Queen Mother Victoria continued relentlessly. "I've discovered that these transactions were facilitated through a network of offshore accounts and shell companies, many of which are connected to known criminal organizations." She pulled out a photograph showing Alexander shaking hands with a man Isabella didn't recognize. This was taken 6 months ago at a private meeting in Geneva. Lady Margaret leaned forward to examine the photograph. "That's Chen Wei-ming. I attended that meeting in my capacity as Chief of Staff, though I wasn't privy to the private discussions." She looked at Alexander with disgust. "That was the week before I submitted my resignation." "You resigned because you knew," Isabella said, understanding flooding through her. "I resigned because I was asked to prepare documents that would have given Chen Wei-ming's companies unlimited access to our rare earth mineral deposits, including areas that are sacred to our indigenous populations." Lady Margaret's voice was tight with controlled anger. "When I refused, I was told that my services were no longer required, but that my silence was essential for national security." Queen Mother Victoria nodded grimly. "And when Margaret came to me with her concerns, I realized that the irregularities I had noticed We're part of something much larger and more dangerous than simple corruption. You have no idea of the economic pressures this kingdom has faced. The traditional industries are dying, unemployment is rising, and our currency has been under attack by speculators for 2 years. I did what was necessary to prevent total economic collapse. You did what was profitable, Catherine said, her voice shaking with emotion. You sold our sovereignty to the highest bidder. Queen Mother Victoria pulled out another document. This is a preliminary agreement signed by Alexander 3 weeks ago that would effectively transfer operational control of our deepwater ports to Chinese military contractors. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. Our ports, Alexander, those installations are NATO classified. Which brings us to the most serious aspect of this situation, Queen Mother Victoria said gravely. These activities haven't gone unnoticed by our allies. I've been in communication with intelligence services from 3 friendly nations, all of whom have been monitoring unusual financial and military activities centered on Valdoria. This wasn't just about corruption or even criminal conspiracy. It was about national security and international relations at the highest levels. Lady Margaret spoke carefully. Was carried out by a guy. Are you saying that foreign intelligence agencies are involved in this situation?
I'm saying that Alexander's activities have attracted attention from people who don't share our interests in maintaining Valdoria's independence and democratic institutions.
Queen Mother Victoria's gaze never left Alexander's face. I'm saying that as of yesterday morning, there are certain individuals who view our family as either assets to be controlled or obstacles to be removed. Alexander shot to his feet, his composure finally completely shattered. This is insane. You're talking about espionage and international conspiracy. I made some business deals to save our economy. You made some business deals that have put every member of this family in mortal danger, Queen Mother Victoria said coldly. And you were either too naive or too greedy to understand the consequences. Catherine's voice was small and frightened. Grandmother, what kind of danger?
Queen Mother Victoria hesitated for the first time since entering the room.
When she spoke again, her voice was gentler but no less serious. 3 days ago, intelligence sources reported unusual surveillance activity around the palace and around locations frequented by family members. Yesterday, a former associate of Chen Wei-ming was found dead in his London hotel room. The official cause of death was heart failure, but my sources believe otherwise. Isabella felt ice forming in her stomach. You think we're being evaluated? Chen Wei-ming and his associates have invested significant resources in their relationship with Alexander. If they believe that relationship is threatened, they will take steps to protect their investment. Selexia collapsed back into his chair, finally understanding the scope of what he had set in motion. I never intended for it to go this far. The initial deals were legitimate business arrangements. When did they stop being legitimate? Isabella asked, her voice deadly quiet. Alexander was quiet for a long moment before responding. When Chen Wei-ming made it clear that backing out wasn't an option, the admission hung in the air like a physical presence. Isabella realized that her husband wasn't just a traitor. He was a victim of his own greed and weakness, trapped in a situation that had spiraled far beyond his control. Queen Mother Victoria pulled out one final document. This is why I came back from Switzerland early. This is an intelligence report indicating that Chen Wei-ming's organization has been making preparations for what they call contingency management of their Valdorian assets. Her face grows tenderly and tenderly forward to read over Isabella's shoulder, her face growing pale. Asset preservation and liability elimination, she read aloud. They're talking about killing people. They're talking about eliminating threats to their operation, Queen Mother Victoria corrected, which means anyone who might expose their activities or interfere with their plans. Catherine's voice was barely audible. Are we the threats? We are now, Isabella said, understanding finally dawning. The moment we found those documents, we became liabilities that need to be managed. Alexander looked around the room at his family, and for the first time since the confrontation began, Isabella saw genuine remorse in his face. I'm sorry. God help me, I never wanted any of you to be hurt. Your remorse is noted, Queen Mother Victoria said crisply, but it's not particularly useful at this point. What we need now is a plan to protect this family and, if possible, save this kingdom from the consequences of your choices. She stood and moved to the window, looking out over the palace grounds with the practiced eye of someone who had defended this place before. The good news is that we have some advantages. Chen Wei-ming's people don't yet know how much we've discovered or what we plan to do with the information. The bad news is that we probably don't have much time before they decide that we know too much to live. Isabella felt a surge of protective fury unlike anything she had ever experienced. What are our options? Queen Mother Victoria turned back to face them, and Isabella saw in her expression the same steel determination that had helped her rule through 2 wars and countless political crises. We have 3 choices, she said simply. We can try to negotiate with Chen Wei-ming and his associates, hoping they'll allow us to quietly disappear in exchange for our silence. We can flee the country and spend the rest of our lives in exile, always looking over our shoulders. Or we can fight. His crown, and Isabella was struck by how much her daughter resembled her great-grandmother in that moment. What would fighting involve? Queen Mother Victoria smiled for the first time since entering the room, and it was a smile that would have terrified Chen Wei-ming if he could have seen it. It would involve using every resource at our disposal to expose this conspiracy, bring these criminals to justice, and save our kingdom from foreign control. She paused, looking around the room at each of them. But it would also involve accepting that we might not survive the attempt. The study fell silent as each person grappled with the choice before them. Outside, the morning was progressing normally. Gardeners tended the grounds, staff prepared for the day's activities. Citizens went about their lives, unaware that their kingdom's fate was being decided in a room overlooking the rose garden. Isabella looked at her daughter, seeing in Catherine's face the same determination she felt building in her own chest. She looked at Lady Margaret, whose years of loyal service had prepared her for exactly this kind of crisis. She even looked at Alexander, seeing in his broken expression a man who might finally be ready to do the right thing regardless of the cost. Finally, she looked at Queen Mother Victoria, the woman who had taught her that sometimes the price of doing right was higher than anyone should have to pay, but that it was still the only acceptable choice. We fight, Isabella said quietly. Catherine nodded immediately. We fight. Lady Margaret's voice was firm. We fight. All eyes turned to Alexander, who sat slumped in his chair like a man bearing the weight of his own conscience. When he finally looked up, there were tears in his eyes, but his voice was steady. We fight, and God help us all. Queen Mother Victoria nodded with satisfaction. Good. Then we begin immediately, because I have reason to believe we have less than 24 hours before Chen Wei-ming's people make their move. As the morning sun climbed higher over Valdoria, the royal family began planning what might be their final battle, not for a throne or a crown, but for the survival of everything they had sworn to protect. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the secure conference room, deep within Valdoria Palace, as Queen Mother Victoria spread maps, photographs, and documents across the polished oak table. The room, originally built as a bomb shelter during World War II, had been converted into a crisis management center, complete with encrypted communication equipment and reinforced walls that could withstand both physical and electronic surveillance. Isabella studied the intelligence reports that Lady Margaret was organizing by priority level. The scope of Chen Wei-ming's operation was staggering. Dozens of shell companies, multiple international banks, and government contacts spanning 3 continents. What had begun as Alexander's desperate attempt to save Valdoria's economy had evolved into something that threatened the sovereignty of multiple nations. The timeline is accelerating, Queen Mother Victoria announced, ending a hushed phone conversation in rapid French. My contact at Interpol confirms that Chen Wei-ming left Beijing this morning on a private jet. Flight records show his destination as Geneva, but intelligence suggests he's actually heading here. Catherine looked up from the financial documents she had been reviewing. How long do we have? If he's coming directly to Valdoria, he could be here by tomorrow evening. Be a Prodigana for meetings, perhaps 2 days. Queen Mother Victoria's expression was grim. Either way, his arrival means the situation has reached a critical stage. Lady Margaret had been monitoring communications equipment that Isabella hadn't even known existed within the palace. Your Majesty, I'm picking up increased encrypted radio traffic around the palace perimeter. Someone is coordinating surveillance activities. Alexander, who had been silently reviewing his own financial records to help identify the full scope of his involvement, looked up with genuine fear in his eyes. They're already here, aren't they? Advanced teams, most likely, Queen Mother Victoria confirmed. 3. Chen Wei-ming doesn't leave anything to chance. He would have had people in place before making the decision to come personally. Isabella felt a chill of fear, not for herself but for Catherine and the palace staff, who had no idea they were caught in the middle of an international conspiracy. What about the palace security? Can we trust them? Most of them, yes. But Chen Wei-ming has had months to identify and potentially compromise key personnel. Lady Margaret pulled out a list of names. I've been tracking unusual financial activity among staff members. Personnel have received significant cash deposits in the past month that they can't adequately explain. Catherine stood and walked to the bulletproof windows that looked out over the palace courtyard. This is surreal. 2 days ago, my biggest concern was whether the environmental summit would attract enough media attention. Now we're talking about foreign agents and compromised security. Welcome to real leadership, my dear, Queen Mother Victoria said gently. This is what ruling actually looks like when the stakes matter. Alexander's voice was heavy with guilt. I'm sorry, Catherine. I'm sorry you have to learn these lessons because of my failures. Catherine turned back to face her father, and Isabella was struck by the maturity in her daughter's expression. Father, we'll deal with your choices and their consequences. Right now, I need to understand our options for protecting the people who depend on us. Excellent instincts. That's exactly the right priority. She pulled out a detailed floor plan of the palace. We have several advantages. This facility was designed to be defensible. We have loyal staff who know the building better than any outside force. And we have something Chen Wei-ming doesn't expect, complete intelligence about his operation. 3. Lady Margaret joined them at the table. I've been thinking about our strategic options. We can't simply expose the conspiracy through normal channels. Chen Wei-ming has too many government contacts and too much money to influence traditional investigations. But we can force him into making mistakes, Isabella said, understanding beginning to dawn. If he believes we know more than we do, or if he thinks we're more dangerous than we are, he might overreact in ways that expose his operation. Queen Mother Victoria smiled with genuine pride.
Exactly.
The key is making him believe that we pose an immediate threat to his interests while maintaining our own security. Studying the intelligence reports. What kind of immediate threat? The kind that forces him to act openly rather than through intermediaries, Alexander said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him, and Isabella saw that her husband was beginning to think like the political strategist he had once been. Chen Wei-ming's greatest asset is secrecy. If we threaten that, he'll have to choose between cutting his losses and escalating his response. Lady Margaret nodded. And if he escalates, he exposes himself to international law enforcement agencies that have been watching his activities. Queen Mother Victoria walked to a secure computer terminal and began typing rapidly. I've been coordinating with intelligence contacts in 5 friendly nations. They're prepared to move against Chen Wei-ming's operation, but they need him to commit crimes on their soil or in international waters. Isabella felt pieces of a plan beginning to form in her mind. So we need to lure him into acting directly against us, here in Valdoria, where our allies can respond. While protecting ourselves and our people, Catherine added firmly, while protecting everyone, Queen Mother Victoria corrected. Because if we miscalculate, the consequences won't be limited to our family. The secure phone rang, and Lady Margaret answered with practiced efficiency. After a brief conversation in coded language, she hung up and turned to the others with the expression of controlled concern. That was palace security. They've identified at least 6 individuals on the grounds who aren't part of normal staff or security rotations. Professional surveillance teams, probably armed. Alexander's face went pale. They're moving faster than we expected. We accelerate our timeline, Queen Mother Victoria said calmly. Catherine, I need you to contact your environmental summit organizers and tell them you're moving the event to tomorrow evening. Make it a major media event. International press, government representatives, as many witnesses as possible. Grandmother, how does an environmental summit help us deal with international criminals? Because Chen Wei-ming can't afford to have his environmental crimes exposed on an international stage, especially with media present. Isabella was beginning to understand the strategy. If we threaten to reveal his mining operations and their environmental impact, he'll have to act to stop us. And when he acts against us publicly with international media and government representatives present, he exposes himself to immediate arrest and prosecution, Lady Margaret finished. Alexander looked skeptical. You're assuming he'll take the bait, or directed us, quietly, and deal with the consequences later. Queen Mother Victoria's smile was cold and determined. Because, my dear Alexander, you're going to make sure he doesn't have that option. Because, my dear Alexander, you're going to make sure he doesn't have that option. You are going to publicly announce that you're abdicating the throne due to health concerns, effective immediately, with Isabella serving as regent until Catherine's formal coronation next month. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Alexander stared at the document as if it were a death warrant. Abdication, he said quietly. You want me to give up the crown. I want you to save your family and your kingdom, Queen Mother Victoria said firmly. Chen Wei-ming's leverage over you disappears the moment you're no longer king. But more importantly, once you've publicly stepped down, any action against you or your family becomes an attack on a private citizens under the protection of international law. I'm not ready to be queen. Isabella moved to her daughter's side, placing a protective arm around her shoulders.
None of us are ever ready for the moments that define us, sweetheart.
But you have something your father and I didn't have when we took on our roles. You have the truth. Lady Margaret was studying the intelligence reports with growing urgency. Your Majesty, if we're going to implement this plan, we need to move quickly. My sources indicate that Chen Wei-ming's advance teams are preparing for some kind of action within the next few hours. Queen Mother Victoria moved to the communications equipment. Then we begin now. Catherine, start making calls about the environmental summit. Make sure to emphasize that you'll be presenting previously classified information about foreign mining operations in Valdorian territory. Catherine nodded, her fear transforming into determined focus. What about palace security?
If there are compromised personnel,
Leave that to me, Lady Margaret said grimly. I know which people we can trust, and I know how to isolate the ones we can't. If I sign this, if I give up the throne, there's no going back. Isabella looked at her husband, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time in months. She saw a man who had made terrible choices out of fear and weakness, but who might still have the courage to do what was right when it mattered most. Alexander, she said gently, the man I married would never have hesitated to sacrifice his crown to protect his family and his people. Rise, and for a moment, Isabella saw a glimpse of the idealistic young politician she had fallen in love with decades ago. With steady hands, he signed the abdication document. God help us all, he said quietly. As evening approached over Valdoria, the royal family put their desperate plan into motion. Phone calls were made, press releases were prepared, and security arrangements were finalized for what would either be their salvation or their destruction. Outside the palace walls, Chen Wei-ming's operatives prepared for what they believed would be a simple elimination of witnesses to their activities. They had no idea that they were walking into a trap designed by some of the most experienced political minds in Europe. The final confrontation was coming, and everything, the throne, the kingdom, and the lives of everyone involved, hung in the balance. But for the first time since discovering those hidden documents, Isabella felt something that had been missing for months: hope. Because whatever happened next, they would face it as a united family, fighting for something worth preserving. The grand ballroom of Valdoria Palace had never seen an event quite like the hastily organized environmental summit that Catherine had managed to coordinate in less than 24 hours. International media representatives filled the ornate space alongside environmental scientists, government officials from 6 nations, and various advocacy groups, all drawn by the promise of revelations about environmental crimes committed by foreign corporations. Isabella stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching her daughter address the gathering with a poise and authority that would have been remarkable in a seasoned politician, let alone a 23-year-old princess who had learned about international conspiracy only 2 days earlier. Catherine's presentation was methodical and devastating, revealing documented evidence of illegal mining operations, environmental destruction, and the systematic corruption of government officials. The evidence I'm presenting tonight, Catherine said, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's excellent acoustics, demonstrates that foreign criminal organizations have attempted to purchase not just Valdoria's natural resources, but our sovereignty itself. Queen Mother Victoria appeared at Isabella's side, elegant in midnight blue silk that made her silver hair look like a crown. "Shh. She's magnificent," she said quietly. "She'll make an excellent queen." Isabella nodded, pride and terror warring in her chest. "If we survive the next few hours, we will." Queen Mother Victoria's confidence was unshakable. Chen Wei-ming has no choice but to respond, and when he does, he'll destroy himself. As if summoned by their conversation, Lady Margaret approached with news that made Isabella's blood run cold. "Artie, Your Majesty, Palace Security reports that Chen Wei-ming himself arrived at the private airfield 20 minutes ago. He's traveling with at least 12 associates, all armed." "Tonight, he has to," Queen Mother Victoria said calmly. "Catherine's presentation is being broadcast live on international television. Every minute she continues speaking is another minute of exposure for his operation. He can't afford to let her finish." Through the ballroom's tall windows, Isabella could see news vans and satellite trucks lined up along the palace drive. The international media attention had exceeded even their optimistic projections. Catherine's promise of explosive revelations about environmental crimes had drawn reporters from around the world. Alexander appeared at Isabella's other side, looking older than his 51 years but more focused than she had seen him in months. Since signing the abdication papers, he had thrown himself into helping plan their defense with the determination of a man seeking redemption. "Security is in position," he reported quietly. "Lady Margaret has isolated the compromised personnel, and our loyal staff are prepared for whatever comes next." Isabella squeezed his hand, surprised by how natural the gesture felt despite everything that had happened between them. "Are you ready for this?" Alexander's smile was sad but genuine. "I'm ready to face the consequences of my choices." That's more than I could say 2 days ago. On the ballroom stage, Catherine was reaching the climax of her presentation. Behind her, a large screen displayed photographs of environmental destruction, financial documents, and recordings of conversations between government officials and Chen Wei-ming's representatives. "The evidence I presented tonight proves that our democracy, our environment, and our national sovereignty have been under systematic attack by criminal organizations masquerading as legitimate business interests," Catherine declared. "But it also proves that when citizens and their leaders work together, no conspiracy is too large or too powerful to be defeated." The applause was thunderous, but Isabella's attention was drawn to movement near the ballroom's main entrance. Palace security personnel were communicating urgently through discreet earpieces, and she could see tension in their postures. Lady Margaret's voice was urgent but controlled. "They're here. Chen Wei-ming and his team have entered the palace. They've somehow bypassed the main security checkpoints." Queen Mother Victoria nodded, as if she had been expecting exactly this development. "Their personnel. They provided access routes. Routine security sent in surge. We need to get Catherine out of there." "No." Queen Mother Victoria's voice was firm. "Catherine needs to finish her presentation. The international media coverage is our protection. Chen Wei-ming can't act violently with hundreds of witnesses and live television coverage." Routine communications on a handheld device. They're moving through the east wing toward the ballroom. 12 armed individuals moving with military precision. Through the crowd in the ballroom, Isabella could see several individuals who didn't belong, well-dressed but alert men and women, positioned near exits and among the media representatives. Chen Wei-ming's advance team had been infiltrating the event for hours. Catherine, seemingly oblivious to the danger building around her, continued her presentation with unwavering focus. He proved that this conspiracy reaches the highest levels of government and involves systematic violations of international law. "She's incredible," Lady Margaret whispered with genuine admiration. "She knows they're here, but she's not going to stop." Isabella realized that Lady Margaret was right. Catherine's slight hesitations and the way she was positioning herself on the stage showed that she was aware of the developing situation but determined to complete her mission regardless of personal risk. The ballroom doors burst open with explosive force. Chen Wei-ming entered flanked by armed associates, his expensive suit and calm demeanor creating a surreal contrast with the obvious threat he represented. He was smaller than Isabella had expected, a well-groomed man in his 50s, who could have been any successful businessman except for the cold calculation in his eyes. The ballroom erupted in chaos as media representatives reached for cameras and security personnel moved to intercept the intruders, but Chen Wei-ming's team had planned well. They moved with choreographed precision to control the exits and establish fields of fire that would prevent effective resistance. But Catherine never stopped talking. The criminal organization led by Chen Wei-ming has attempted to purchase the loyalty of government officials, compromise our environmental protections, and threaten anyone who opposed their activities, she continued, her voice steady despite the armed men moving toward the stage. Chen Wei-ming himself, approached the podium with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted through intimidation. Princess Catherine, I think you've said quite enough.
Caesar returned directly at him.
Mr. Chen, thank you for joining us. Your timing is perfect. I was just about to discuss your organization's policy of eliminating inconvenient witnesses. The international media were capturing every moment. Live cameras broadcasting the confrontation to audiences around the world. Then, Chen Wei-ming's face showed the first signs of uncertainty as he realized the scope of his strategic error. You have information that doesn't belong to you, he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that made his words seem more menacing. Information that could cause unnecessary complications for many people. Queen Mother Victoria stepped into the ballroom's central aisle, moving with the regal bearing of someone who had faced down far more dangerous enemies. Chen, I believe you've made a serious miscalculation. Chen Wei-ming turned to assess this new threat, and Isabella could see him processing the implications of Queen Mother Victoria's presence. He had come to silence witnesses, but found himself instead confronting 3 generations of royal women with international media as witnesses to his crimes. Your Majesty, he said with mocking politeness, I'm here to discuss a private business matter with Princess Catherine. You're here, Alexander said, stepping forward to join his wife and mother-in-law, because you believed you could intimidate my family into silence about your criminal activities. Isabella felt a surge of pride as she watched her husband face the man who had been manipulating him for years. Alexander had found his courage at exactly the moment it mattered most. Chen Wei-ming's composure finally cracked as he realized he had walked into a carefully constructed trap. You have no idea of the forces you're dealing with. The consequences of opposing my organization extend far beyond this little kingdom. Carathan's voice rang out clearly from the podium, carried by the ballroom's sound system to the international audience. Mr. Chen is correct that his criminal organization extends beyond Valdoria, which is why I'm pleased to announce that law enforcement agencies from 12 nations have been coordinating their response to his activities. There's a pallet of 2 Buckingham Palace deckers, decorated by agents from multiple national intelligence services. Chen Wei-ming's team found themselves surrounded by superior numbers of better-positioned professionals. The criminal mastermind who had thought he was coming to eliminate inconvenient witnesses instead found himself the center of an international law enforcement operation that had been months in the planning. Queen Mother Victoria's smile was triumphant. Mr. Chen, you've just committed multiple international crimes on live television in front of representatives from the world's major law enforcement agencies. I believe that qualifies as what young people call a complete strategic failure. As Chen Wei-ming and his associates were taken into custody, Isabella felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she had been carrying. The conspiracy that had threatened to destroy her family and her kingdom was finally coming to an end. With quiet dignity. Tonight's events demonstrate that democracy and rule of law remain stronger than criminal conspiracy, but only when citizens and their leaders have the courage to stand together against corruption. The applause was deafening, but Isabella's attention was focused on her daughter's face. Catherine looked exhausted but triumphant, a young woman who had discovered her own strength under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Alexander joined Isabella as they moved toward the stage to embrace their daughter. We did it, he said quietly. We actually did it. Catherine did it, Isabella corrected. We just finally remembered how to be the people she deserved as parents. As the royal family reunited on the ballroom stage, surrounded by international media and law enforcement officers processing one of the largest international criminal conspiracies in recent history, Isabella understood that everything had changed. Alexander's abdication meant that Catherine would soon be queen, but more importantly, the events of the past 3 days had forged their family into something stronger and more honest than it had ever been before. The Kingdom of Valdoria would face challenges in the months ahead as the full scope of the conspiracy became public knowledge. There would be investigations, trials, and difficult conversations about how such extensive corruption had been allowed to take root. But there would also be renewal, reform, and the kind of authentic leadership that Catherine had demonstrated under fire. Broke over the palace for the fourth time since Isabella had discovered those hidden documents. She stood with her family on the balcony overlooking the capital city. The morning light revealed a kingdom that was scarred but not broken, challenged but not defeated. Catherine would make an extraordinary queen, Isabella realized, not because she was perfect or because she had all the answers, but because she had the courage to face difficult truths and the wisdom to understand that real leadership meant serving something larger than herself. The crown's shadow had been lifted, and in its place stood 3 generations of women who had learned that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty to a throne is the willingness to sacrifice everything to preserve what it truly represents. The future remained uncertain, but it was theirs to shape with honor, truth, and the kind of courage that had carried them through the darkness of the past 3 days into the promise of a new dawn.